in violent activities. Through the Violent Interrupters program, the Peace Management Initiative Western has to date engaged over 3,000 youth through the delivery of life skills training, behavior modification programs, conflict mediation, skills training, opportunity for employment, and community development programs. The organization has also managed, with the support of the police, to negotiate peace treaties among warring factions within Western Jamaica. The peace treaties have been negotiated in communities of Canterbury, Flanker, Salt Spring, Norwood, and Cambridge. The overall objective of Peace Management Initiative Western is to strengthen and increase organizational and technical capacity, whereby improving its ability to help transform the communities in Western Jamaica into peaceful, productive, and law-abiding spaces. It is also aimed in increasing the organizational capacity of Peace Management Initiative Western to serve its beneficiaries. This will be achieved through supporting investment in community development, education and training, and the promotion of economic development. The effect will be to build a community that fosters creativity and provides opportunities for the development of all. The effect will be real and sustainable change in the lives of residents of violence-riddled communities in Western Jamaica. Some of the issues that are facing the community's residents in Western Jamaica. Issue of gang formation and violence. According to the JCF, there were about 238 gangs operating in Jamaica in 2013, while on May 20, 2020, a news article quoted Honorable Dr. Horace Chang giving an update in the Parliament and House of Representatives, stating that Jamaica's gang problem shows no sign of abating, with some 389 criminal organizations operating in the country up to the end of 2019, and presenting a clear and present danger to the society. Of that number, 250 were found to be active. Dr. Chang then was presenting the report to the Joint Select Committee on the Criminal Justice Act, more commonly referred to as the anti-gang legislation. The data provided suggests that between 2013 and 2020, a 7-year period, there has been approximately a 62% increase in the number of gangs operating in Jamaica. Inadequate social and physical infrastructure. Social infrastructure can be broadly defined as a construction and maintenance of facilities that support social services. Types of social structure include healthcare, hospitals, education, schools and universities, public facilities, community housing and prisons, and transportation, roads. All of these structures serve as a backbone for communities and societies to function adequately. Poor housing conditions, the legal connection to light and water, as well as squatting, to include zinc fence, are current factors that exist in the majority of communities that experience high crime and violence, suggesting that their poor infrastructure is being experienced in these communities. Family violence. Family violence is a term used interchangeably with domestic violence in discourse among family scholars. It covers physical, social, and emotional abuse and acts on aggression within relationships that are considered as family connections or akin to family disconnection. The result of the first national survey on gender-based violence in Jamaica shows a high prevalence rate of 27.8%, with more than 1 in every 4 women in Jamaica experiencing intimate partner violence in their lifetime. Lottery scamming. In 2018, Jamaica law enforcement was assisted by international partnership to work on 109 lottery scamming cases and seeing the extradition of 6 lottery scammers to the United States. Criminal elements pose as legitimate lottery companies and convince unsuspected U.S. citizens to spend a large amount of money, send a large amount of money to Jamaica to obtain and claim lottery winnings. The lottery fraud scam operators, predominantly from the North Coast, near the tourist areas. Lottery scamming can be linked to unemployment of youth. Some recommendations: development of an assessment instrument to assess risk level of community and its members to erupt in conflict and as such into violence. 2, development of a ZOSO anti-conflict sensitive program to support Section 28A to include training of conflict sensitive warders through Peace Management Initiative Western. 3, implementation of family empowerment programs through a multi-agency approach which supports Section 24E, managed by Peace Management Initiative social workers and psychologists. The combination of knowledge and experience of the actual circumstances on the ground and the multidisciplinary overview of available prevention strategies and appropriation can help strengthen the conflict within these communities and at large on the international sphere. Number 4, continued use of peace management peacekeepers in the field to monitor and maintain peace in volatile communities across the areas where the zones are operated. Number 5, introduction of anti-gang program in schools to resemble the peace and love program that now exists. It is of note that during adolescence, peer groups and social networkers form, each of which can positively or negatively influence a youth's life. Rather than immediately joining serious violent gangs, some youth become involved in less delinquent groups called starter gangs. Gangs are often at the center of appealing society action. Parties, hangouts, music, drugs, and opportunities to socialize with members of the opposite sex. The gang may be appearing and appealing because it meets the needs of the youth. Recommendations, therefore, is to provide for social needs that the gangs offer without the need for starter gangs, and in so doing, build gang refusal skills. Other recommendations: psychosocial support to be granted to those that have been severely affected by violence within Mount Salem and the other communities within Western Jamaica. More opportunity fairs within these communities, more training opportunities for individuals who are unattached, and finally, youth empowerment sessions to mitigate possible relapse after the ZOSOs have gone. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for your input, Mr. Baldwin, and from PMI work. Any questions from the members? And but I'd comment, Mr. Baldwin, say a note in terms of if you think there's a need for any amendment to the legislative framework being presented, or any addition that you may wish to add in terms of legislation. That's what we're doing on the current piece of legislation. And the AG has the first comment.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay. Chairman, you may understand if I extend a very special welcome to Reverend Dr. Richard Keane to this forum and his team. Just want to thank you, Mr. Baldwin, for the informative presentation. Your caption references a subcommittee of Parliament. This is actually a joint select committee of Parliament. So for your own record, you may wish to correct at some stage if this presentation was prepared specifically for this committee, just at the start. What role, if any, do you see the family plays in the work? I haven't seen it as a feature or anything centrally identified in the peace management work. And I'm wondering, when the state or the peace management, which describes itself as a quasi-state body, having been registered, I mean, what role do you see the family has to play in the work of peace and peace management, and in the work that you also do through the initiative?
We believe, thank you ever so much for the opportunity to share. We really feel that the family unit has always been in the past in Jamaica a very strong influence in how children are growing up and how children conduct themselves thereafter, especially after leaving home and going into the wider world. And therefore, we are focusing a lot on interviewing families and ensuring that families continue to exist within their communities. Of course, you know that this is very difficult, especially in the situation in Jamaica where the father is many times absent and the mother therefore plays a dual role. But our objective is to speak to these mothers as much as we can and to bring them into an understanding of the family structure and how they ought to bring up their children. Also, we are working with the children at the school levels, at the primary school levels, so that we can, in fact, influence them as to how their conduct, the choices that they make, right and wrong, truth and untruth. And so we are having and developing programs both to speak to the children as well as to the parents, where they are both male and female, and to the mothers where there is single parenting. Family structure is very important to the fiber of the nation, and we at PMI are going to be very focused on this.
When you do the intervention, how do you engage the family in that? I don't know if that's what you're trying to answer, interviewing. I'm just not clear. Maybe it's just my... how is the family formally engaged? And while I'm asking that, may I ask if you could put back the slide where you had some recommendations in respect of the ZOSO at the end about continuing intervention, fairs, towards the end of the presentation. More opportunity fairs, more training opportunities, youth empowerment sessions to mitigate the possible relapse after the ZOSO. Do you have any assessment of how fairs operated under the ZOSO has worked? Have you interacted on the social intervention side with the JSC, the work of the PMI, in the Mount Salem ZOSO?
Thank you. The PMI function on a scale where we go into the communities, the social workers, and also the peacekeepers, formerly known as the violent interrupters, and we interact with the individuals within their homes. And for those whom we find who have challenges, we invite them to the PMI office where we continue sessions with them on a regular basis. And there are at least 7 to 8 sessions that we go through with individuals, families, to ensure that whatever challenges they are facing, that we can deal with them. And for those whom we cannot deal with, we do the referrals to other organizations so that the situations can be remedied. And we do the follow-ups also over a particular period of time.
I just wonder, Mr. Baldwin, your team, what attempts have you made to sit down with the gang leaders and gang members and have face-to-face or discussion with them during your tenure?
Thank you. So, the interaction with the individuals, very delicate one. It's very delicate. And so peace management have to be very careful as we enter those areas and deal with the individuals. But we are not fearful because we have the officers are trained, the peacekeepers, social workers, and so we will go into the areas and we will, on a regular basis, I should say, speak with these individuals and to see how well we can reduce the violence and...
But the question really, have you had a regular meetings? I mean, have you ever tried to, you know that gangs don't exist unless they fight in another gang. They don't just exist in a vacuum. So have you had the opportunity to identify the gangs in any of these areas and try to get them to talk to one another?
Yes, Mr. Member. We have done that on a regular basis, and even in the community of Cambridge. Mm-hmm. In Cambridge, we are presently in that area, and we have met with the individuals, and even recently there were 3 killings since the beginning of the year. And we have been there, the peacekeepers, the social worker, and we have interacted with them, and we have had discussion with them.
You see, I mentioned this because it seems to me that unless there's dialogue between the gangs, they will continue to fight. And, you know, having done it in my area, I use the ministers fraternal who bring the gangs together so that they can interact. I mean, so the question is there a continuing program to meet with them? I mean, you may have to meet them on the gully banks, right?
If I may, member, thank you for that question. Yes, in fact, the PMI has gone forth and met with a number of influential persons within some of the most volatile communities in Western Jamaica, even Mount Salem as well. And we have, on many instances, formed ceasefire agreements with various warring factions and communities that have their differences. Sometimes it is hard to bring both parties to the table because of how ticklish the situation is. However, there are times when we are able to bring them to an agreement We have no problems in meeting them where they are, whether going into the community or finding a mutual meeting ground where persons can meet and discuss their differences and put an end to the issues that they may have at hand. As was asked earlier regarding the opportunity fairs and other initiatives, we have seen where a lot of persons and a lot of unattached youth within communities don't necessarily have the credentials to go and seek a job. They may not have finished school, among other instances. So we would bring partner agencies in to assist them in getting whatever they need to get a job, whether it may be JFLL, whether it may be HEART, whether it may be PICA for those who don't have an identification, among other things.
Is this a continuous program? Are you able to identify the different gangs? Yes.
Interaction with the community. We need to look at issues that we need to review in relation to the legislation. Now, one or two questions, you get that dialogue on the whole program. That's not the, in fairness, it's not what you have invited them here for. Based on their experience, they can advise us on what we may need to legislate or not legislate to strengthen the approach that we're talking about. We are not reviewing the PMI program. The PMI program should be well known to you, quite frankly, as the Minister of Justice.
Yeah, but save an exec chairman. No. Action is much more important.
No, but the activities is not easy. This review's remit is to, based on the experience of organizations like PMI, is the legislative framework have adequate? And we could, if we do this for every program, we'll spend the next 3 months reviewing them, because there are about 40 different groups that are doing this kind of work, right? So, in fairness, you may wish to comment again, but I'd ask the members to guide the question to look at, keep focused on what we're doing.
Well, one of the major recommendations that we'd like to put forward is increasing the number of persons that we have underground within communities like Mount Salem. So even after ZOSO, when the security forces would have left the community, then, well, not entirely, but we would have persons underground who would be able to work alongside the PMI to let us know what is happening within each area of the community, whether there is any situation or anything at odds that we need to come in and address and move the community forward, whether it may be infrastructure, whether it may be education, or whether it may be conflict that needs immediate attention and intervention. We had 2 persons on the ground working in the community, and we'd like to increase that cohort. We saw an initiative under the Live Good initiative that was coined by the minister, where he started to do data collection was done by a number of persons within the community, and a lot of demographic data was gathered. That information would filter well into the program as well, where we would be able to carry out certain initiatives based on needs assessments done.
And then, Member Senator Brown.
No, I think I might run the risk of being admonished, as you have done to the Minister just now. So let me, I have some views.
Some comments later, but the Minister is getting into almost a monologue.
No, I'm very keen on their budget. How much does this cost you, and how do you fund this?
A budget for
PMI's operation in the West.
PMI's operation.
Yes. You have employees.
Yeah, we do have employees.
Yes.
Since March of last year, since the ending of CSJP, the PMI's budget has been severely hampered. Actually, for this year, we will be running at a deficit of possibly $15 million.
Yes, you said deficit. You mean you'll be operating in the red, minus 50 million, or?
At the end of this year, based on our budget that we have developed for 2021, we get a subvention from government. This subvention has been in place since 2004, and has not been increased since then. At the end of CSJP in March of last year, all of the peacekeepers were sent home because there was just no budget. What we receive from government presently is just for the administrator, the social worker, and the janitor for the office, and for rent, and for take care of stationaries and so on. When the board looked at the situation within the communities, they made a decision to employ some of the peacekeepers within some of the communities that were more volatile. In Hanover, we had 11 peacekeepers in 7 communities. Because of the ending of CSJP, presently we only have 3 peacekeepers in 3 communities in Hanover. In Westmoreland, we had 14 peacekeepers in 8 communities. Since the ending of CSJP, we now have 5 peacekeepers in 3 communities. In St. James, we had 17 peacekeepers in 11 communities. Since the ending of CSJP, we only have 8 peacekeepers in 5 communities. So most of the communities, and even some of the communities that are now erupting, for example, Flanker, Norwood, and Salt Spring, we don't have any peacekeepers in those communities.
How are you funded now with the existing low level of peacekeepers?
We are funded now, as I said before, with the subvention that we receive from government. And I don't know if you want to know how much we receive. You would like to know. For each month we receive $1.2 million from government. 1.2. Our monthly budget is over $3 million. What the board has decided to do is to keep these peacekeepers within these communities and reduce the stipend that they used to get. When Dr. Gale did his research on the peacekeepers, the PMI program in Western Jamaica, they were getting at that time $40,000 per month. And his recommendation was that they should get $80,000. The $80,000 was done through CSJP. Now that CSJP is gone, then there's no funding. So the board has decided to take on these peacekeepers within the targeted communities, and they are now receiving $40,000 per month. We are funding the peacekeepers, the supervisor, and the social worker out of the savings that the PMI had over the years. And what I'm saying is that based on what we have at the end of this year, we will have no funds at all except what we'll be getting from government on a monthly basis.
May I just speak to the matter of the finances? A number of our peacekeepers, when we were unable to pay, when CSJP was closed, and more so during the COVID experience, they offered to continue to do their work, some with 50% cut and some without any salary or any stipend. They were willing to continue to do the work of PMI as peacekeepers because they sensed a need for their presence in the community so as to maintain the activity of our prevention, and whenever violence does occur or a situation occurs, to bring resolution. So there are people on the ground right now who are committed to the work of PMI, not looking for anything. That doesn't mean that if they get it, they wouldn't take it. But their main focus is for the maintenance of peace and the restoration of peace where there's any breach in that. So that constitutes a fair number of persons who continue to be. Those that are presently, as Mr. Baldwin has indicated, are getting a stipend. The finance is going to run out by the end of this year that we have. However, at the same time, we are looking at other agencies through which we can get funding. So although we are receiving monies from the Ministry of National Security, our hope is to go and receive funding from other agencies so that we can continue the work. So all is not lost. We are pressing in and we are making proposals to other organizations to assist us so that we can carry on the work of PMI.
Senator Brown.
Yes, Chair. Let me start by thanking the team from PMI West that is present, and thank you and the volunteers and the staff for the work that you have been doing, because you operate in a zone that has impacted the murder rate in the country significantly. But there is one ZOSO in the West of the 4 in the country since 2017. Could you share with us whether or not you are working in the Mount Salem ZOSO zone, and how could your work be better advanced in that zone, or if another zone is declared anytime in the West? That's the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Member. We are not working in the ZOSO area presently, as was mentioned before, because of the cut in our finances. There's no way we can go into some of these areas. And so presently we are not in Mount Salem.
Second question I want to ask is, there is under clause 23, Chairman of the Act, the Social Intervention Committee. It doesn't now create a space except probably any other person or agency that, in the opinion of the minister, can assist in the work. Do you think the work of PMI West would benefit from being included in the Social Intervention Committee in the zones?
Oh, we would love to be there, and we know that if we were present, it would be significant. And we are, in 2021, hoping that we can resume our activity in Mount Salem, because we were there before.
I hear you to be saying that as one of the changes in the ZOSO legislation would be for a space on the SIC, the Social Intervention Committee, for PMI West, and I suspect you would extend that for PMI East, where there are ZOSOs in the eastern side. So I'm just trying to confirm, that's a recommendation that you are making now, that you're putting forward?
Yes, sir.
Yes, and in the proposal presented to the committee, it was mentioned there that 5 peacekeepers and 2 social workers and a psychologist would be appropriate to be in that community.
It's not examination in chief. So yeah, so that, Chairman, I just want us to note that recommendation so we can put that on the matrix of things that we will look at.
Sinclair.
Good afternoon.
That recommendation of Senator.
You have indicated that PMI started in 2004 in Western Jamaica, right? And over that period of time to current, you would have been having interventions, you see, in various communities, opportunity fairs, you have been involved in training, you would have been doing the items that you are presently recommending as additional recommendation, correct?
Yes.
I didn't hear you.
So it's right.
Good. And you also said you increase your peacekeepers that you had, what was paid to them as a stipend or salary was increased to 80,000, and it is presently at 40,000.
Yes, when they were originally receiving 40,000, after the research done by Dr. Gale, that was increased to 80,000.
Yes. And when was that? When was that?
That was 2017, I think.
2017.
17.
And
Yes.
prior to that, they were at 40,000.
At 40. Some were at 40 and some were volunteers.
Okay. Because I looked at some statistics between 2012, which took us up to 2016 in St. James, where the murder rate coming out of various communities would have been increasing at the rate of 20% per annum until it got to 345, which was the highest, right?
Yes.
Correct?
Correct.
And with the implementation of the state of emergency, you have had a reduction to where it is at current. So we have a problem because you have outlined in your presentation objectives, you have been financed over the period of time, you have had increases to staff, you have had increases to salary, you have been having these various interventions. But we had that gradual increase to where we got to in 2016 in St. James. I'm having a difficulty in appreciating how you make the connection, where you would have said you would have been doing all these things with resources provided to you from various places, but it would seem that we have not been getting the results that would all appreciate over that period of time.
Questions? If then, just one comment, Senator Brown, is just one thing I'd say in noting there's a difficulty naming any single individual organization, the SIC, which are not directly involved in the counter operation, because there are about 20, there are certainly in the last 5 years in Montreal, about 50 different organizations have been operating and about 20 still operating in the space. I have a list of them here, some that are there, right? No, they are not coming here, they have been operating in the space and doing similar work.
I think it's the membership on the SIC.
Oh.
Because that's where we'd have to amend the legislation.
I'm just saying, if you amend the legislation to accommodate, you can't make it a singular accommodation. Because
I am prepared to open up to look at members from non-government agencies like PMI, but given the role that PMI play, and if you have others who are playing that role, then it's going to be for the minister to decide which of them, but we should provide in the legislation for groups like those to be on the committee.
Chairman?
Mr. Samuda.
Before Mr. Chairman, they leave, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around what you have presented on, and how could I appreciate that with all the work that you would have been doing, we had this continuous growth in violence, murder, over that period of time.
Point taken, Senator Sinclair. In fact, it's a multifaceted issue, We also have to take into account that the PMI does not work in all the volatile communities in St. James, unfortunately. For example, when the PMI was contracted to carry out the violence interruption program, a list of 10 communities was brought forward to us that we should focus on. And that was based off 2014 statistics. Now, a number of key communities was left from that list. So unfortunately, a number of communities was left off. So the focus was not granted to those communities as well. Secondly, data from St. James would also indicate that there have been spikes in certain communities, also a number of homicides happening in the general business district of Montego Bay, unfortunately. So unfortunately, it's unable to be tracked back to a certain community. You also have to take into account that there may be bodies found in some communities, and the homicide would have been recorded to that community when it may not have happened there. So there are a number of issues that come to the fore that you'd have to look at on a different level to attribute where the issue may be coming from that caused something to happen within the general business district of Montego Bay and its environs.
Chairman.
Just a follow-up. What communities were you operating in? And I think in response to, I think it was Senator Brown, that you had indicated that you are not in the Mount Salem area, but you still have not stated currently which communities.
Communities that we are presently in are Adelphi, Anchovy, Cambridge, Canterbury, Flanker, Granville, Lilliput, Norwood, and Salt Spring. And this list was before the ending of CSJP. Presently, we are only in Anchovy, Cambridge, Granville, Lilliput, and yes, not Salt Spring. No, we're not in Salt Spring presently. So they are only out of the list that we have. We were assigned. That list was greatly reduced because of it going out of CSJP. And the ones that we are now in are because of the funding from the reserves that PMI do have.
Chairman, if I may.
Senator, Minister, and then.
So, not to prolong the discussion, but just to be clear, you were in Mount Salem prior to the declaration of the ZOSO, correct?
Yes,
yeah.
Correct.
And how many programs prior to the end of funding, or how many communities would you have been in previously?
Previously, the focus was on 10 communities under the last program of the ministry.
What would have been the ministry's subvention prior to the end of funding? From the CSJP program?
The subvention still remained the same at 1.2 million.
No, but what was it before? It was always 1.2 million because you say you now have a shortfall.
It was. It's been that way since 2004, as was mentioned in the presentation earlier.
No, so which funding expired?
The CSJP funding.
And how much was that funding?
Well, the CSG funding was on a contractual basis, so it depends on what programs were implemented.
What was the totality?
It was about
around 50 million.
50 million.
50 million.
To 70 million, yes.
And would you hazard a guess as to how much, for instance, would have been spent in St. James? Or what percentage? Give me, not holding it to exact numbers, but just as a guess.
Maybe say 40%.
So say 40%. In a part of Jamaica that is 595 square miles, in 2017 we would have peaked at 342 murders, a murder rate of 137 per 100,000, which is what would have prompted the very actions that we would have taken by way of the state of emergency and by way of the ZOSO in Mount Salem. Now, when I look at the report previously, and certainly not to go into any details, Chairman, and oblige me, you've had a 91% reduction in shootings in Mount Salem and an 89% reduction in murders since the declaration of the ZOSO. Can you tell me when the intervention, or your peacekeepers, as you've dubbed them, would have ceased working in Mount Salem?
All right, thank you for highlighting that. What I will say is that while PMI was working and we had one person assigned to the Mount Salem community, unfortunately, we also have to take into account that the Mount Salem police station covers a number of neighboring communities. And a lot of those figures may be captured from communities not covered by the PMI, but covered by the police station. And as such, some of those, I've seen incidents where some of those homicides have been recorded to Mount Salem when it's really under the Mount Salem Police Division.
But you'd acknowledge that significant resources and significant footprint would have been in St. James relative to the rest of the country.
That is correct.
So, and meanwhile, and I hope you don't think I'm diminishing the efforts or the intention of the PMI, but highlighting the fact that that by itself couldn't work without the legislation before us. And to ground my commentary in the legislation before us, and to take up Senator Brown's point, I wouldn't be supportive, Chairman, of expanding the Social Intervention Committee to include NGOs. The very intention of the legislation is to ensure that normalcy is returned through the intervention of the security forces, and that the state apparatus is able to do its work. The reason we insist on them reporting quarterly to the Parliament through the Security Council is to ensure that the state, the arms of the state, are actually doing their work. I wouldn't give up that role of the Parliament or diminish the importance of the Parliament reviewing these reports on each ZOSO by, stating that we need an NGO of sorts to sit in that space. Now, is there room for coordination of the varying NGO work? I would certainly recommend to the Social Intervention Committee that they look at advising us through JSC how that can happen, but legislating it is not a position I could be supportive of, Chairman.
Thank you. Member Force.
Thank you, Chairman. What are the criteria used for PMI's intervention in a particular community? One. Based on that answer, from your work on the ground, or let me hear the answer first, and then I'll determine the follow-up question. Do you have set criteria that determine, or just broad generally, what are the features of a community that would cause the PMI to go in? High crime rate, escalating crime rate, gang running, criminality, those kinds of things, right? So from your work over 15 years, the ZOSO law is seeking to combine security, operations, and social intervention work in order to deal with communities that experience high violence, lack peace. From your decade and a half experience on the ground, what approach would you commend to the government in dealing with communities that are crime-riddled and that have experienced neglect over time? Because that's really what we're seeking to do in reviewing this law to make it more effective. Many times when communities are riddled with crime and violence, it is a security response that has been central and probably solely so. The government has moved beyond that, having heard the cries that these are communities where the state has been absent, along with a number of other things. Fragmented families, lack of cohesion. We're seeking to improve the approach that is taken, and we would really want to hear from you, based on your experience, what can work, what can be done better. I get it that you are struggling with your budget, notwithstanding increases that have come, And so I kind of get the angst about the budget. If you have not communicated anything, you have communicated that, but that's for a different forum to deal with. This one is to look at ways in which we can improve the approach being taken in dealing with communities of the sort that you would have worked in.
Thank you ever so much. The first question, can you just refresh my mind? I'm not hearing you so clearly.
I was asking if you had set criteria which would determine the communities in which you intervene with the Peace Management Initiative.
Certainly any community that has an eruption of violence, we would be there, and we have been. And I just want to emphasize the fact that we do go in and we do seek through our mediation to bring parties that are warring against each other and to establish peace in those families or in those parties. So violence really...
Reverend Keane, so you say you use mediation where there is a dispute between parties.
Yes.
Am I sensing that charging persons, bringing them before the court from your work may not be the best approach to deal with persons within those communities? So it can be a dispute between two members of the community, between family members, and in handling the dispute, one or both may break the law. If a crime is committed, then if a complaint is made or a police investigate, it can result in a charge. And one is taken before the court. Worst case scenario, there is a conviction, they go to prison. Is that the best approach to deal with it? We're just asking, what from what you have seen, because we're not getting a sense of what the collective experience has been to make the recommendation to say we have seen. For example, what is a typical profile of the violence producer? Because many times we hear that, you know, the persons who commit the crimes or allegedly commit the crimes, they all go to church, they are the saints, and all you hear about is a cry of police brutality that they have been taken in. You know, if you are trying to separate them from the space. Who are these people? Sometimes we hear that pure saints live in the communities that are experiencing disruption or you know, don't know.
Well, you're right. You're definitely on track. We have a risk profile that we work from, and it includes a lot of things. It could be recently arrested for a violent crime. It could be access to weapons. You would probably fall within the age range of 15 to say 29. That's the typical age range for perpetrators regarding data from the police, among other things. So we have looked at the risk profile of a perpetrator and that of a victim as well. So we can look into that also with our partners. We work with the schools. So whether we have troubled students from the schools, and the PMI will be calling to probably give counseling to students and also give presentation to students. So in each community, there are different stakeholders that we work with. And based on the issues that we see coming out of each community, then we derive a plan as to our approach to go into these communities, meet with those who are at risk, and see how best we can approach the situation.
Let me thank you, AG. No, we're going to take the police in a little while now because we are going off on a discussion of a program without the recommendations. One recommendation has been made, and we take that. And I think there's a good knowledge of the work of PMI. And they said, you know, Senator Brown has helped to kind of recommendation for the legislation, which we'll discuss and debate later. I don't diminish the role. PMI has some very good people on board. I think they have had Dr. Keane, who heads a particular church, was preceded by Reverend Jackson, Bishop DeFore, all men of outstanding character and commitment to change the community. But as I said, the role of this committee is to examine what we can do with the legislation, and we are getting off in that. So I think you have given a fairly good overview of your own work, and a recommendation was made which we'll review and go through. We need to hear from another two presenters what their recommendations are. Right. Mr. Baldwin, you want to make some comments?
Chairman, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. May I just say something on what member had just asked? How can we help to resolve the situations within the communities? Social workers play a very vital role within communities. Prevention is key. And if we have more social workers, community social workers, within the communities to resolve some of these challenges before they reach to the level of crime and violence, then we would see a better community and the interaction within the families and community members. So I would suggest that more social workers within these volatile communities will help to resolve some of the conflicts.
Thank you very much. And while you have completed your presentation, you may, if you wish to stay in or if you wish to leave, we're going to have a presentation from the police now, Police Federation, to do their presentation, and then the City Security Secretariat, which should be of interest to everyone. But you are free to time yourself to leave after this. We take note of your presentation. We have a document, and we have the presentation on board, which will look at what will impact on the review we're doing. There is room for discussion on the method and process of intervention, and that comes with not the City Security Secretary, a different role, where the Citizen Monitoring Committee and the Business Council will look at what we're doing in terms of social investment in the communities. I'm going to invite the Police Federation. I think we begin with Corporal Ron James and Ms. Thomas. Where are we now? And Ms. Tamika Thomas, am I right? Who's doing the presentation now?
Yeah. May I just thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hearing our presentation, and we will remain for the other presentation.
Okay. And you're welcome. It's sharing of ideas. Corporal James, you want to introduce the team and indicate who will make the presentation?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Harris Strong, our Security Minister, and I dare stress that for the Joint Select Committee, members of this Honorable Joint Select Committee, let me first introduce my team. I'm Rohan James, Corporal, the Chairman of the Jamaica Police Federation. With me is my esteemed General Secretary, Detective Constable Tamika Thomas. With us also is Inspector Blanche Codner, Corporal Arlene McBean, and Detective Constable Nigel Murphy. They are all members of the Central Executive Committee. Let me thank this Honorable Joint Select Committee for extending this invitation to us on the 24th of December, 2020, to state our position on the review of the enactment of the law reform, Zones of Special Operations and Special Security and Community Development Measures Act of 2017 that is currently under review. It is to be noted that our submission primarily centers on insertion and amendments to the Zones of Special Operations Act, and our recommendation are as follows. As it relates to Section 18, 1, every complaint made by or concerning a person arrested or detained shall be recorded in the station diary. We believe that treatment of persons arrested or detained should be first and foremost be part and parcel of the recording, so to speak. Section 2 of 18, a person who is arrested or detained under this part shall, during such time as may be determined by the prescribed officer, be allowed such visits as may be permitted, having regards to matters of security and safety of person. The Police Federation amendment recommendation, we believe that it should read safety and security. As it regards to 3 of 18, notwithstanding the provision of subsection 2, the spouse, partner, family member, religious counselor, registered medical practitioner of his choice, and attorney at law shall be permitted to visit at any time a person referred to in that section. The Police Federation recommendation for amendment, we believe that this section 3 should further read, allow where practicable, subjected to the discretion of the appropriate officer. Note that subsection 2 and subsection 3 is contradictory and do not represent the constructively realities of policing and resources that are available. Section 19(1). A member of the joint force shall, as far as possible, having regard to the availability of resources, use a body camera when conducting operations within a zone. The Police Federation is asserting for amendment that our recommendation is that all police officers assigned to the zones of special operation shall be equipped with body-worn cameras as stipulated to the specification of working in these zones. And we are asking the Joint Select Committee to take key note of this aspect of our recommendation. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act consequentially amended some errors in the first schedule, and as it regards to section 23, subsection 1, for the purpose of this act, the Prime Minister in Council shall, within 5 working days of declaration of a zone, establish a committee to be styled the Social Intervention Committee. Social Intervention Committee. The committee shall be comprised of at least 10 persons selected from among the following constitution of the committee. The Police Federation insertion recommendation, a representative of the Child Development Agency, representative from the Office of the Children's Advocate be added to this committee, and that the committee to report to Parliament quarterly on all implemented projects and social intervention projects and their progress on a quarterly basis. Also, the second schedule, section 27, which led to the consequential amendment of section 5 of the Constabulary Force Act, the Police Federation is saying in recommending the deleting of the words, he shall, for such offense, forfeit and pay a penalty not exceeding $2 and $20 and summary conviction. It shall be lawful for the court, in case such penalty shall not be paid, to commit such person to an adult correctional center with or without hard labor for the period not exceeding 3 calendar months, and substitute therefore the words, he shall commit an offense and is liable to summary conviction in a parish court to a fine not exceeding $250,000 or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 months. The Police Federation's recommendation for amendment: sub-officers and constables of the force may be enlisted for a term of 5 years, and no sub-officer or constable of the force so enlisted shall be at liberty to withdraw himself from the force until the expiration of that term, and no sub-officer or constable of the force who has not been enlisted for a term shall be at liberty to withdraw himself from the force until the expiration of 2 months from the time he shall have given notice in writing of his intention to do so to the officer under whose immediate orders he shall be, and if any sub-officer or constable shall resign or withdraw himself before the expiration of such term without the permission of the Commissioner of Police or without such previous notice, in the case such constable or sub-officer does not give such notice, then such constable or sub-officer shall forfeit and pay a penalty not exceeding $20,000, or in default of payment, the court shall order that the fine be taken from the outstanding emoluments that are due to the member. The rationale: to remove the 6 months notice to 2 months. On the face of it, the second schedule, by making the option of a custodial sentence available to the court, breaches the right to protection against subjection to inhumane or degrading or other such treatment, as that the custodial penalties are grossly disproportionate to the offense resigning before the expiration of 6 months. The constitutional right to protect from inhumane and degrading treatment was meant to wholly outlaw disproportionate penalties. This position was established in the Privy Council's decision of Gangasing, I believe, Luke, the State of Mauritius, 2010, UK Privy Council. 1. Accepted by our Court of Appeal in the case of Tafari Morrison against the Queen, 2020, JMCA, Crim 34. In our submission, the legislating a custodial sentence is grossly disproportionate, having such regard to the gravity of the offense and the circumstances in which police officers seek to resign. It is our view that it breaches our right against inhumane and degrading treatment, and as such, the second schedule of this legislation is incompatible with the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom. In light of the fact that this amendment was passed after the passage of the Charter of Rights, this legislation is not protected by excluding laws clause that protects legislation that predates the Charter. All Jamaicans, including members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, have the right to protection from torture or inhumane or degrading punishment. Further, individual liberty is one of the most fundamental rights recognized in our Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom. In order to take these rights away, even temporarily, governments have a duty to justify the use of imprisonment as a necessary tool to achieve their objective and demonstrate that there is no less restrictive means which the objective cannot be achieved. Leaving a custodial sentence for a judge by way of legislation should be reserved for a punishment that is most egregious and serious. It would then be left to the judge to make an assessment of the intrinsic seriousness of the offense, taking into account the offender's culpability in committing it and the harm the physical or psychological cause or intended to be caused or might foreseeable have been caused by the offense. Is imprisonment such an effective way of deterring police officers from resigning before the expiration of 6 months?
Mr. Chairman, if I could interrupt Corporal James, and my apologies for doing so, Corporal. If he could just point us to the particular consequential amendment that he's referring to in the second schedule. It's not clear to me which of the amendments laid out there you're referring to in this.
The Constabulary Force Act was consequentially amended in 2017 in the second schedule. Section 5 of the Constabulary Force Act was consequentially amended.
I'm grateful, thank you.
Can this be achieved in any other way? The reality is that alternatives may infringe less on human rights of police officers who would be otherwise be detained or may be less expensive for the state. Measures against the standard of human rights protection and expense, the argument against imprisonment being an option of the court is irresistible. Does imprisonment of police officers prevent them from resigning prematurely again? Does it afford them the opportunity to be rehabilitated during the period of imprisonment? Is it likely that police officers will just desert the office instead of submitting resignation in order to avoid possible imprisonment and criminalization? It is the Police Federation's humble submission that rather than criminalizing, incentivizing would be a more opportune solution to the legislators to ensure that we overcome this hurdle so that the citizens of Jamaica can be properly served and that the police officers will work unfettered. The Police Federation wishes to thank this Joint Select Committee for affording us the opportunity to make this contribution to this Honorable Joint Select Committee. We now accord ourselves for questions from members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thanks for your suggestion, and we won't give a decision here, but we take note of all the recommendations which will be coming from the police. Any questions from the team?
Honorable Chair, Dr. Chan, the PMI West would take the opportunity at this time to thank you for having us, and we'd like to go back to Montego Bay at this time. We appreciate staying.
It's safer in Kingston. It is.
Dr. Keane, thank you and the entire team, not only for coming and making a presentation based on your experience with the committee, but for the work you're doing in the many communities in Montego Bay, and for your work of your both the PMI and in your own right and the members' own right, all the members in the team are working as individuals through the various organizations to maintain some stability and work in the community of Montego, in various communities in Montego Bay. Let me thank you and wish you a safe ride back to Montego Bay. All right? That's all a big problem, road traffic in this spin. To comment on the...
Thank you, Chairman. Just seeking a little clarity. The extent of the Police Federation's contribution on the review of the law is your bone of contention with the consequential amendment that was done in respect of the terms of enlistment for a member of the JCF by the law. That is the extent of the presentation you wish to make to this committee.
That is one of, Madam. The other that we insist upon, Madam, in
the body-worn camera.
The body-worn camera.
And also the visits.
And that the discretion be that of the visit, that it be redown to the discretion of the appropriate officer in the interest of security and safety.
And so the concerns primarily relate to the safety of the men and women under the Federation.
That is so, Madam.
I see. Do you have anything in relation to the operational side of the law? Or is your remit entirely about the safety of the men and women who would be deployed to the zone?
Senator Brown.
Yes, Chairman. I have a number of questions arising from the Police Federation's submission. I want to thank them and thank the service that their members give to the country, more so in these difficult times, and with the high murder rate this month, we cherish them even more so. I just want to start by asking Corporal James. There are 4 ZOSOs now. We are below the establishment level for members of the force. What impact, if you can say, the multiplication of ZOSOs are having on the physical and mental and moral attitude of the men and women of the Jamaica Constabulary Force? Can you speak to that? That's the first question.
I'm happy for that question, member. It is having a very debilitating effect on our membership, in that our membership are required to work in excess of 40 hours per week. And what we find happening too, even without compensation adequately, is that the chronic ailment and the lack of resources, so to speak, for members to be able to have a proper nutrition while serving out there, it is having some very consequential effect on their health. And oftentimes, not only on the health, it is causing members to have to incur further debt having to be reassigned in these zones and being away from the family, it is causing them to incur additional expenses to have alternative arrangements made for them, family-wise. So a number of factors are impacting the membership, and I am happy that they are being commended in the face of adversities, but we are resilient and we are prepared to step up to the plate and to do whatever is necessary in the confines of the law to continue to serve this noble nation and make sure that whatever it is that we can do to save the lives of our citizens, we do so. So motivation is a factor for us. And though we are 8, our membership prides us and look towards us for guidance and encouragement. And I'm happy that you would have asked that question so that in the future, I'm sure that our minister, who is very much a caregiver and a steward in guiding us, have also, in his quest, seek to ensure that he gets the necessary resources to posit in our direction to enable our membership. And it is for this Joint Select Committee to put aside partisan politics and to ensure that whatever recommendation that is in the interest of national security, that we show the weight behind national security for the better cause of Jamaica and our citizens.
Chairman, before I ask the second question, it seems as if I could sum up what Corporal James has said, that praise is good, but a little raise would be better. The second question, Corporal James, that the Police Federation, which represent the rank and file below, inspector and below, seems to be saying here on page 2 at the top that you are for wearing body cameras, which could not only protect your interests, but could indicate what happened in a confrontation or encounter with citizens. Yeah, that's the point, protect both. The issue, however, for me is, why isn't this now being done? I'm aware, I was told that Friendly Nation had made big donations to us. So, and we thought that this would have been the case when we discussed the ZOSO, that body-worn cameras would be part of the joint team. Why is this not being done? Is it that you're not refusing to wear them? Do you know why? Are you issued with them?
We have not been issued with them, but from what I know is that there are continual dialogue between Commissioner and the Minister, and I'm sure what we do appreciate is that our membership are rearing and eager to have this aspect of it, because it will not only assist us in our operational efficiency, but it will enlighten the court's position in arriving at a determination with matters that will appear before the court. And it will also lend itself to effective accountability and transparency.
3 years after the law has been passed in the Parliament, body-worn cameras have not been issued to the force. Third question that I want to ask, Chairman, and I support the call that you make for this Social Intervention Committee, for the Child Development Agency to be brought on board, and Office of the Children Advocate. Why are you making this thing? Is it that the ZOSOs are showing up cases of children being abused or impacted? Why is this call being made by the Federation? I support it, but why is it being made?
On the issue of the body cameras are being worn, but there needs to be continuous training for new members who are being placed in those zones. And it would also require more cameras than what is currently available at our disposal.
When you say being worn, what percentage of the force deployed in the ZOSO areas are wearing body cameras?
Whilst I don't have the data offhand now, I'm sure that there are at most checkpoints that these members are operating, that the cameras are being worn. The minister and the commissioner have been in dialogue. I'm sure also that we are being updated periodically, but we are making stronger representation that more cameras are needed for all the members who are operating within those spaces. As it relates to the issue of the other interest groups to be a part of the committee, we are finding that the information coming to us that abuse are taking place, and it would be good if these persons are a part, these persons who are advocates are very much a part of this committee, so as to bring to light and place recommendations so as to enable the efficiency of the whole operations within those zones, that all of these things can be in place for the greater good. Yes, it is in fact unconstitutional, and I want to thank you, because what we have found happening now is that several of our members who have intended resignation to their commanding officers are now being dismissed as deserters, and it is impacting their capability and their capacity to continue with their normal course of life, even though they have given yeoman service to this country and have tendered a resignation, which is a legitimate means of separation from an occupation or career. They are now being placed in limbo because the force have acted upon this consequential amendment and have treated them as being deserters, sufficient to say that they are dismissed, and this have implications for their pension and emoluments down the road, which is a travesty of justice in any scheme of things.
Thank you, Senator Brown, just for the comment. Maybe on the chairman, the body cameras are on order. enough to cover the entirety, ZOSOs and elsewhere, but I wouldn't get that. Yeah?
I crave your indulgence before you go on.
But
just a point.
I just want to point, I'm going to give it, but Mr. Brown, that Senator Brown, body cams are nothing you buy off the shelves. Those that come off the shelf have demonstrated their inefficiency before. Said body cameras we don't buy off the shelf. I'm saying body cameras on order for the relevant numbers and will be assigned, but body cameras are nothing to buy off the shelf. You do that, we end up in a number of problems, as was previously demonstrated. I'm going to that another time.
Are you saying 3 years?
Actually,
we've been waiting for them?
Yes, and I think, in fact, the way it ended up was quite a good time. I can give you the story another time. Right. Right.
Chairman, I can appreciate the concern of the chairman of the Police Federation in relation to the matter at section 5, but I believe you would appreciate that this ZOSO did not create any new provision in respect of that. So persons who would have enlisted in the force would have enlisted or should have with the knowledge of that provision. It was an updating that was taking place. So anyone listening on could get the impression that the ZOSO law created a new provision in respect of the enlistment provision. That is not so. And secondly, it did not create an outright term of imprisonment, as Senator Brown had put forward, because a fine is a sentence separate and apart from a sentence of imprisonment. And imprisonment in default of the payment of the fine is a separate matter. So just again for accuracy, important.
Let me clarify for this Joint Select Committee the injustice that has been made in the consequential amendment. It is that a fine of $20 was in the Constabulary Force Act. That was subsequently increased to $250,000, which is $250,000, which is that the police officer who is a constable is not even being paid $80,000 as basic pay. So he would be imprisoned for 3 months' salary, for which the government is not even paying him in 1 month. The other aspect of it that the injustice has done is that this consequential amendment, which was not being utilized by the constabulary force, is now being used by the Commissioner of Police to treat with members who tendered their resignation and wishes to move on with life, that the Commissioner is now invoking Regulation 27, subsection 1, to treat these members as deserter, which consequentially now places them in a predicament because they no longer can access their pension if and when they reach its pension age, having served this country and given human service and was never ever incriminated. It is merely because they have now sought to separate themselves from the service, which is having served Her Majesty's force, they are now being treated as modern-day slaves, having left the capacity, which is a travesty of justice.
Sergeant James, I am sure, I appreciate, again, the importance of proper conditions of service. And it is clear that there are many concerns across the public sector. The problems did not originate overnight, and attempts to fix them may not bring it to the level in the time that is required, but issues have to be addressed undoubtedly. Undoubtedly, they have to be addressed. I'm just a little curious about the perspective of the police in respect of a national police service and a national police force, and whether issues relating to the fight of crime can be looked at in a context, because there are different fora for addressing different issues. And I don't know if it is that whatever fora are available for the Police Federation to deal with those issues, that you think it important that it has to come to the Parliament in this joint select committee. Just hear me out. I'm just saying. I'm not at all attempting to minimize your concern. And to the extent that the issue is somewhat linked because it came by virtue of that, it's still not a part of the ZOSO. And I understand that the conditions under which the policemen and women have to work will undoubtedly be of concern to you. Understand that clearly. Persons listening on will also wonder on the other side about the approach, because what I'm really hearing, if I'm to be frank with you, is almost that the police officers may not be able to discharge their functions because your conditions of service and your pay are such that you really can't do anything about crime fighting. I don't know if that is a message that you intend to convey. I don't think that it is, but it could be one of the messages heard.
Senator Motley.
Let me correct the narrative, madam.
Yes.
It is that what the Federation's position is that we are simply saying that the consequential amendment to have increased the fine from $20 is significantly disproportionate as obtains to when you look at what it is that the police constable earns from the government's coffer, which is less than $80,000 on a monthly basis as his basic salary. And for us to have been placed in a zones of special operation second schedule amendment, which is that we have an act, which was the Constabulary Force Act, and for it to be placed nicodemously in a consequential amendment, and for us to be placed in a worse off position, we are simply saying that it ought not to have manifestly occur in the first instance.
Just make one comment and rest the issue at this stage. So one of the things that the ZOSO has done is to look at capacity of the police to deal with crime fighting. And in recognition that the police capacity currently is not sufficient, it has created a legal framework to bring the army alongside. Dealing with capacity will cause a consideration of persons leaving the force and the framework for managing that. But I understand where you're coming from, but I don't want you to miss the point. There was nothing Nicodemus in putting the provision there, absolutely nothing Nicodemus. Because if we are saying at one point that the capacity of the force is nowhere sufficient, then the framework, which the amendment is not new, it was already in place. When limited resources are used to train, then it is not unreasonable from one perspective that persons serve out the time. But what I hear you say, that if it is that persons are to go, then instead of dealing with it through this mechanism, perhaps they should be made to pay in another form. Pay for the training, probably be bonded or something. Because it will raise question when you train an officer and you invest money in them should they then just leave? In the public service, for example, persons who get scholarships are bonded. If you break the bond, you pay it back. So the best case scenario of what I hear from your growth is that leaving the police force should not bring a penalty of the nature that is in the statute book. That's what I hear.
Let me bring some clarity, madam.
But hear me well, there's nothing Nicodemus about it. Right.
Bonding yes.
Thank you for bringing this to the attention of the Joint Select Committee. When I discovered that the provision was made through the consequential amendment, I was quite struck by it. I also have to say that whereas I understand the thinking behind a requirement for 6 months' notice, and I might not share your view that 2 months is adequate, I think there has to be some middle ground in terms of the notice which must be given. Because once somebody has decided to leave a job, we know this, psychologists know this, they're finished, they're done. In fact, in some matters, employers will require that when a resignation is tendered, that arrangements be made for the person to leave, because you know you're not going to, there's no longer any commitment or any passion about that job. So I personally thank you for your submission. I think it was regrettable that it was done. And in the same way that I don't think this is the forum for us to discuss how it must be resolved outside of the legislation, I do think that since we are reviewing the legislation, it was very appropriate that you brought it to our attention, and we will look at it. I'm sure the chairman, as I know him to be, such a very reasonable person, will give it the sort of diligent inquiry that it requires.
I'd like to thank the Police Federation for making this definitely suggestion for amendments. Small number, read to the force recommendation, but significant, and we will certainly consider them. The purpose of this committee is to get the suggestions. The Federation rank and file have had the experience of working the field, and we understand that these recommendations are coming from your experience on the field, and that's the purpose of this sitting, again, to look at the zones of special operation. It's a unique piece of legislation, so therefore it was set up to be reviewed in a particular time frame, and what we have to do coming out of this is to make it better for all concerned, because the chance that we're going to have to work with it, I think is, not the chance, we will work with it for some time, and we expect to lay out a legal framework that will give us some outcomes in these areas where there are serious challenges for security and other arising from various other dysfunctional activity in there. We made it. So let me thank you all for your contribution, and we'll certainly consider, look at what is being recommended. We're going to
thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you and your committee.
So thank you all for the
And I want to thank my members of my Central Committee for appearing with me before this honorable committee. Thank you.
We're going to have a presentation. We could get you, we have an hour, literally, on the city security plan, which is really indicate the direction of social investment by the government as proposed. And this is the plan as outlined, and we have the policy document behind it in terms of how we ensure coordination, not only coordination of the activities in the communities, but to ensure we bring in place a more empirical-based approach to the event so we can have genuine monitoring and accountability and, if decided outcomes based on which we can, move on into other areas of social issues. We have, well, our Executive Director of the City Security Secretariat, Mr. Dan McIntosh, may want to introduce a team, and then we proceed to take their presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Thank you very much for the invitation to discuss the new approach of social intervention or social strategic intervention at the community level. Today with me, the submission is shared with the Office of the National Security Advisor through Brigadier Roderick Williams, who is the coordinator of the Plan Secure Jamaica strategic program, and the Citizen Security Secretariat. Minister mentioned I'm the Executive Director, and with me is also Mr. Aubrey Stewart, who is our data manager in that Secretariat. So I'm going to turn over now to Brigadier Williams, who will discuss a little bit presentation on the plan, and then we'll come back to the operations of the Secretariat as of October, what we have found, some of the challenges, and the way that we're proceeding forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Director. Good afternoon, Chair, other members of the committee. Again, I also want to express my thanks for the opportunity to make an input into your review of the ZOSO Act. This part of the presentation really is to provide a synopsis of Jamaica's City Security Plan, which is a thematic component of Plan Secure Jamaica. But more specifically, what I'm going to try to do quickly is to contextualize the City Security Secretariat, as well as what we believe to be the utility of the ZOSOs within the context of the City Security Plan. And as Ms. McIntosh indicated, she will follow, of course, with more specifics on the Secretariat, and then we will conclude with our recommendations. This is the outline we'll follow. I spend much of the time talking about the approach of the plan and delve a little bit more into the governance framework, which I think will be of particular relevance to this committee. So I move quickly through these aids just to indicate that that is the goal of the plan itself, which is to improve citizen security towards a safe, secure, and cohesive and just society. The plan itself was arrived at through broad multi-sectoral stakeholder engagement, and the work was actually completed around September 2019, and the plan was endorsed by NSC in October 2019 and subsequently approved by Cabinet in May 2020. Here I want to just speak a little bit about the policy and strategy framework that the plan fits into. I already alluded to the fact that it's a thematic component of Plan Secure Jamaica. And of course, Plan Secure Jamaica is that more broader, comprehensive, coordinated, integrated, flexible, and inclusive and enduring approach that we're bringing to delivering on the developmental goal of a more safe, secure, and just society. The intention, of course, is to target the myriad of long-standing challenges by effectively employing proven, evidence-based, inclusive, and sustainable approaches in addressing the many and varied threats to Jamaica's security as they exist now and as we see them emerging in this dynamic global environment. In addition to environmental hazards, of course, these threats include crime, corruption, and injustice and their drivers and root causes. And it's a whole of society, multi-sectoral approach, we believe, to implementing the national security policy in pursuit of the second goal of the National Development Plan that this security plan represents, that we think will take us to where we need to be in the most efficient and effective way. Here, of course, the concept of national security necessarily is treated in broad, people-centered, human security terms. And what I'd like us to note here is that Plan Secure Jamaica prioritizes citizen security as the single most important developmental reform that Jamaica is undertaking. And so significant focus is placed on promoting and pursuing those measures that will nurture, strengthen, and protect democratic civic order, prevent or reduce crime and violence, ensure compliance with rules, and the setting of other conditions that allow for secure, cohesive, and peaceful coexistence among our citizens. I have to say that in pursuing the measures outlined, all agents of the state are held accountable in accordance with the rule of law. They are required to demonstrate respect for human rights and dignity of our citizens and to operate legitimately with discipline and integrity in countering the many and varied threats to public safety, national security, and national development. And the final point I want to make here is that the plan itself is not being put forward as something that is going to address all of the issues with security in Jamaica. It is not a silver bullet. It instead works in tandem with other initiatives, other broader initiatives, other thematic components of the wider plan to deliver on the outcomes. And other components are things that we're doing in respect to cybersecurity, maritime security, border security, etc. And this is part of the overall piece that's contributing to the outcomes we seek. Specific to the plan, these are the outcome-oriented strategic priority areas. So these are the big muscle movements, the key things we're trying to achieve. First and foremost, of course, is a reduction in crime and violence, having those levels reduced to acceptable levels that we will all, as citizens of the country, find acceptable for everyone. Second is the ability for residents to use spaces safely by reducing opportunities for crime and violence, as well as providing effective environmental safeguards from victimization. And third, and probably most importantly, is the empowerment, I should say, of community residents and organizations to contribute to their own security. And these activities, we believe, will serve to transform lives and communities. Here I'm sharing the key attributes of the plan. They are self-explanatory. Just because it's a little bit small in print, I'll just quickly go through. So the first day, of course, speaks to what I just spoke to, prioritizing security in the most vulnerable communities as an important component of the wider efforts. Bullet 2, of course, speaks to addressing the root causes and thereby setting the conditions for significant behavior change and transformation of communities to include, as I alluded to before, the provision of more life chances for at-risk youth. And third and the fourth bullets speak to the coherent implementation and transparent accountability that will be required for success. And I'm mentioning those because we have found in certainly the research that went into this that that's one of the more larger issues to be addressed, the issue of coordination of activities and coherent implementation across the board. So in speaking to the approach that the plan takes to citizen security, I want to point out that emphasis is placed on the most vulnerable and at risk of our citizens. So if we were to use murders and shootings as a proxy for levels of vulnerability, what this image shows are the locations of the top 50 communities for the 33-month period indicated. And the relative situation is more or less the same today. These are presented, of course, within the context of the 19 police divisions, and the colored areas represent the most vulnerable communities in those police divisions, where the darker the shade, the higher the incidence of murder and shootings recorded. Why I put this up is just to make a point. And the point is, these 50 communities, when we looked at the data, represented 44% of the murders and shootings in Jamaica over the preceding, on average, over the preceding 5-year period. So the essence of the plan's approach is to comprehensively treat with each of these areas while simultaneously minimizing the probability of growth in the number of such areas. This should see the interventions and therefore our limited resources being targeted where the problems are greatest, thereby stemming the bloodshed, that is saving lives, while treating with the root causes for more sustainable outcomes. Additionally, in respect to the approach the plan takes to delivering on citizen security, the clear hold build strategy is also used as it provides an important supporting framework for delivering on the outcomes we seek. And in this particular context, the approach is that the communities are selected for intervention from a continually updated list of the top 20 most at-risk communities. And what we expect to happen is that as we move forward in time, we will expand the number of communities that benefit from this particular intervention. And we'll have an opportunity as we go forward as well to the monitoring, evaluation, and learning mechanism to improve our processes as we go along. What I should also point out is that the plan is particularly geared in the hold and build phases to support improvements in police effectiveness through problem-oriented and community policing, offender management and rehabilitation, as well as supporting the creation of safer spaces for as well as human and community development, again with the aim of transforming these communities to where we'd like to see them get to. Here, I'm providing a little bit more detail on how this clear hold build approach is applied. So what we can expect to see intuitively, we can deduce this, that in the clear phase, what will happen is that you will neutralize the influence of criminals within the targeted spaces. In the whole phase, of course, we will reestablish the rule of law and seek to have more police engagement in neighborhood problem solving, and of course, measures to build trust between the police and those communities. And of course, in the build phase, again, essentially what we're doing here is empowering the community to contribute more effectively to their own security in the long run, and of course, improving the life chances of those who are most vulnerable and at risk. This takes me to the governance framework. A lot of the elements here, the committee members will recognize. What I want to spend some time on is just sort of explaining quickly what the more unfamiliar ones are about. So at the bottom of the table, you'll see the plan itself with two broad components. One is the operational mechanism. This is the set of action plans, if you will, or activities. And then, of course, a monitoring, evaluation, and learning mechanism. And on top of that, there are three entities. The first is the Citizen Security Secretariat, the Citizen Security Business Group, and of course, conceptually, a Citizen Security Oversight Committee. The Secretariat, their primary function is to drive the operational mechanism. So they essentially drive the action plans. They coordinate the implementation and ensure that things get done. So they operate at the operational level. At the more strategic level, you have the Citizen Security Business Group, and their primary role is to drive the monitoring, evaluation, and learning mechanism. So essentially, they're ensuring that the right things are being done and that they're being done right. And they are ultimately, given the composition of this group, here we'll have on the security side, the heads of all the security entities, on the social intervention side, all of the many and varied elements and entities that get involved in that kind of activity. But also you have, to ensure the whole of government approach, you have the entire Permanent Secretary Board. And so you have all of the administrative heads of the various ministries, departments, and agencies who are here, that comes under the chairmanship ultimately of the Prime Minister's designate, to ensure that they remove implementation barriers. And this speaks more about the terms of reference, but essentially they are ensuring that the whole of government contribution to the whole of society approach is realized. This is a slide to allow me to speak a little bit more about the monitoring, evaluation, and learning mechanism, and this is an organogram that sort of shows the rough relationships. What I really wanted to highlight here is the fact that the intention is for the community-based organizations to be intimately involved in the design of the solutions for their space. So they are meant to be engaged in a robust and structured way, baseline targets, performance indicators, measures that make sense for them in their space, things they know will work, things that are proven to work, at the level of the social intervention committee within the space. And this is already a feature of the legislation. It makes provisions for this. I guess what I'm highlighting is that I believe that there's room for, on the operational side, for this to be leveraged more. But they are meant to be part of the solution, and what the plan proposes is that that is done in a more rigorous way, as opposed to just being in the room and maybe you're heard. And just to further reinforce the point, this particular results chain illustrates the performance measurement framework that is associated with the monitoring, evaluation, and learning mechanism. And what I want to highlight here is the fact that governance, the governance framework itself, is subjected to rigorous monitoring and evaluation. So it is also part of what is assessed, again, because in the development of the plan, it was found that that is an area where things would normally fall apart. It was an area that could have benefited from more improvement, where invariably you don't have that surviving for long enough to ensure that the outcomes are realized. So not only are the stated outcomes of the plan itself being rigorously monitored and evaluated to inform lessons for improvement, but the governance mechanisms are also subjected to the same rigor. At this point, I invite the Executive Director, Ms. McIntosh, to talk some more about the CSS and what they have accomplished and doing now.
Thank you, Ms. McIntosh.
Yes, thank you very much, Brigadier. So as Brigadier stated, we were officially, CSS, Citizen Security Secretariat, was officially established in October 1, and basically established to drive the operational mechanisms of the Citizen Security Plan through very, very strict coordination, coordinating directly with the implementing agencies to ensure accountability and effective execution. And this is all built around the root causes that impact on the individual, the family, and the community. That also speaks to the outcome priority areas that he mentioned: crime and violence reduction, safer spaces, and human and community development. This is the coordination that it's focused around. Now, what we've discovered, and we started in October with a small team. Currently, the crime data and statistics is predominantly used to drive the decisions for selection of communities of ZOSOs. So the data machinery to address the community-based issues at the community is weak, and there is a need to strengthen the MDAs in their internal systems and the community-based data machinery for better data making decision making at the community levels. The key ministries, departments, and agencies included in the 6th Social Intervention Committee are not positioned to respond to the issues strategically in these areas because of the lack of comprehensive data, and sometimes most times right now the MDAs have not built into their strategic and budget plans specific and targeted activities for the ZOSO or for these areas. So a lot of times this is not in synergy with what is in their budget, what is part of their resources that are allocated, and therefore it just doesn't get done. And because the data that they're working from is not strategic and is not there. There's also limited technical support to the Social Intervention Committee in terms of the standardization of their work plans and their program designs. So to be able to hold these agencies accountable in their execution, the technical support is much more needed because they're not able to, place a work plan that is strategic, that is targeted, that does not come forward, and they would require that kind of support to be able to do that as we roll out the programs and this accountability framework that is so necessary in the execution and success of this massive coordination program. And the other thing that we discovered, this is in 4 or 5 months of our being there, drilling down operationally with the teams, the security forces basically are significantly strained, and we all knew that, because there is no cohesive transformation program that supports the crime management services. So you have crime management at one end, and then the social transformation or social intervention activities, which are also siloed by all these different partners on the ground, but they are not specifically speaking to an area or the zone that is being called forth. So it's really the security forces alone that's out there trying to hold it together. So in response to these challenges, and as I said, 4 months into operation, we have, as a team, strategic citizens security, I'm still getting wrapped around the terms, citizens security secretariat. We have formulated a strategic response framework that is essentially built around a hybrid coordination unit. It is important to be able to see everything and to see all the pathways, so that we can become much more prescriptive in our response. And in doing so, we would have to have a much more standardized data collection instrument to collect data at the risk factor levels, the individual, the family, and the community levels. Right now, we are very responsive in the way we reactive in the way we respond to what is going on the ground. And so the data that is to be collected would have to be, as I said, standardized. All the agencies coming together in terms of their respective areas that are collecting data and agreeing to a standard instrument in which health can be able to information can be collected for health, information collected for education, for social security, all compiled or pulled from this one standard data form. And in doing so, one would become much more prescriptive in their response. You'd be able to predict behaviors or to predict based on the comprehensive socio-demographic type of information and the crime information, because we're doing this in collaboration with the police as well. What a zone or an area would likely be, will likely be predicting or will be projecting in if particular types of behavior continue. And so we would be able to guide the social intervention committees and the ministries, departments, and agencies in this accountability that they're expected to prescribe or to set out in terms that is in keeping with the allocation of resources that are invested in the communities. So far, since October, We have spoken to about 20 stakeholders, and this includes the permanent secretaries. Permanent secretaries have been the key critical. We've identified about 5 or 6 critical ministries, and those permanent secretaries and their key technocrats and their principal financial persons have met with the unit and to map out the response, to agree on a standardized data collection framework, and to be able to also give an indicative type of budget in terms of what it is that would strengthen their respective data collection systems, so that when we pull together the standard instrument, it would serve the purpose. It will serve everybody's purpose. The other thing that we have done is and this centralized data management system would definitely strengthen it would eradicate the doubling up and overlapping of data collected on communities and individuals as it is right now. If you are, just giving an example, in the West Kingston ZOSO, a study would have been prepared by, done on behalf of the CRP, the Community Renewal Program, a lot of data speaking to high levels of domestic violence. You speak to the ministry that has thematic policy responsibility for domestic violence, and they are also speaking with an NGO that is responsible for the development of the programming or the creation of the shelter. But at the same time, the JCF is also working through domestic violence intervention centers in their 4 divisional police headquarters. The CSS is able to see all of those pathways and bring everybody together so that in the long run, you are maximizing on the resources that you have and being much more impactful. So that is the hybrid coordination that I'm speaking. And as an example, that's exactly what is happening now. So that's the role that we play to pull everybody together and also hold a key ministry. If you are working with the NGO, and the NGO is the one delivering on the ground, the key ministry that has the thematic responsibility or policy responsibility must ensure that those targets are met based on the comprehensive data that is collected. We also have put together an advisory or think tank. So even though Brigadier speaks about all the different levels of governance that have been established, the think tank is really for the CSS in terms of helping us to review the data collected, look at the program design that is being recommended or the program design that is currently being carried out by the particular ministry, department, and agency, and in keeping with the data suggest, well, you know, I don't think this is going to work. Again, moving towards a much more prescriptive type of solution rather than responding to the problem as it is right now. So based on what I have put forward as what we have found in the last 4 or 5 months, 4 months that we've been on the ground, we're recommending the following, that the CSS be referenced in the context of the Act as the entity responsible for coordinating and monitoring. This is one of the weakest areas, and I've no doubt the Citizen Security Plan was set up to stem that type of weakness. But the CSS is really the node, the coordination node, and the coordination is the key thing here. Everybody is monitoring and evaluating. Yes, we have a guided structure to work from, but as I said before, one central body has to see what everybody is doing and pull it all together. So we are saying that we ought to be empowered. The CSS ought to be empowered within the legislation to provide strategic guidance to each of the SIC. And by legislation, the role of the CSS, it gives greater weight and credence to its efforts, whilst taking it out of the realm of being only an administrative creature to having some grounding in legislation. We also suggest, recommended that for Section 24 of the Act, which elaborates on the function of the Social Intervention Committee, that a reporting requirement be introduced. The requirement should mandate that each SIC submits a monthly report. I think there's an error that was put forward in the report that you have there. It says quarterly, but we prefer it ought to have been a monthly report to the CSS. And this report would comprise information on the expenditure and the progress of activities described in the respective work plans. This is, if we're serious about accountability, this is what we need to be doing. Accountability and oversight is linked to the expenditure, the progress, the start date, the end date, who's responsible, and if there are any challenges or any gaps, any problems that the various ministries, departments, and agencies are having, the CSS is able to see everybody, because we're engaging with all the permanent secretaries, the principal financial personnel, the critical entities, the critical ministries, because there are about 5 or 6 critical ministries of all the stakeholders that have serious implementation, serious work on the ground. And so this is the recommendation for Section 24 of the Act. We also, this might be a bit trivial, but we would love to see a change from social intervention to social transformation, because Social Intervention Committee is, the acronym there is SICK, and it's, it just doesn't, I think that the name more closely, social transformation or social investment, yes, but it just fits more closely to the nature and ultimate objective of the efforts of the committee. I'm going to ask Brigadier has an additional recommendation, and he will just elaborate a little bit more.
Thank you very much. So the additional recommendations, Chair, the first one I want to highlight just has to do with the intractable nature of the problem that the Act, object of the Act, seeks to provide the legislative framework to help to address. Against that background, at Section 4.1, we'd want to propose that the initial period on declaration be increased to at least 1 year. And again, this just recognizes that it will take more time if to address the root causes in an enduring way. It will take years. The other, Section 5, goes in step with that. So if the initial period is 1 year, if that is accepted, we propose that extensions be increased to periods not exceeding 90 days at a time. What this will do is to bring the extension period more in line with the monitoring, evaluation, and learning mechanism for the city security plan, where as it is now, the city security business group is required to make quarterly reports to the National Security Council. And it will also allow for a more meaningful period for the measures to take hold. And then finally, at Section 24, 1, and that entire section deals with the functions of the committee, but I want to bring your attention to Section 24, 1C. And 1C addresses the requirement for the development of a sustainable development plan for each declared space. And the proposal here is that there should be an explicit requirement for baselines, targets, and performance indicators to be included in the articulation of such plans. Because the experience has been that the planning at that level is not as robust as it ought to be. And this would be a way to more firmly connect the activities in the declared spaces to the overall governance, to include the monitoring, evaluation, and learning mechanism to bring more robustness and rigor.
Very much. We take question. Member Paul is the first hand up. Before you come in, just a point that I just cover the highlight. One, the movement, the evidence-based activity, which has not been part of social investment in the country at all, has been defined, and this is a baseline activity to be established in all activities. Secondly, the term that is used, prescriptive as opposed to reactive. The fact is that despite the length of time we have had challenges, most of our interventions have been reactive.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I wanted to probe a little bit because I am seeing a very far-reaching, almost fundamental shift in approach here. Mr. Williams, you won't be here when we do our conclusions, but I do believe that one of the roles of this committee is to say whether or not, in reviewing this law, we shouldn't just scrap it and start afresh because of the approach that is necessary. You know, Chairman, I lament our situation because for decades we've been trying to fight this problem of crime and violence, and no government has been able to achieve that, no minister, and we have to find a way as a country to come together now to see how we can solve this problem. And your focus on citizen, the role of the citizen, and by extension communities, ought to be a different approach. But I don't think you're focused on the role of the citizen in fighting crime. We, in our post-slavery, post-colonial society, we have seen the role of the police as that indispensable element of the state that is necessary to fight crime. And we laud them, but are we giving them basket to carry water? Are we giving our ministers basket to carry water in relation to fighting crime in this society that is coming from the history that we have? And earlier, Minister Samuda mentioned about the role of the state apparatus, the security forces, and you don't want to mesh the NGOs with the state in fighting crime. But I believe in your presentation, though you didn't zero in on it, what is the role of the citizen? You have established these CSJP projects, and yes, the citizens are involved in the management, but what about the fighting of crime? Coming to terms with the elements in the communities that they're a part of, and how they can be empowered going forward to get, and it's not to get rid of. I don't believe people should be involved in vigilante justice. But they know the people. They operate in the same environment. I felt very sorry recently when I heard the presentations of both the JDF and the JCF, because as they control crime in one area, it balloons into another. So it is a futile effort that we have been engaged in for so many years. What is the role of the citizen in fighting, and not politicians, the citizens in fighting this scourge?
Thank you for your question, Member. I think I attempted to, in my presentation, to emphasize that the approach that is proposed here is rooted in a more broader whole of society approach. So beyond just the responsibilities of government to deliver on security, those responsibilities exist and they remain, and they will have to be, those obligations have to be met. But part of what we expect to happen is that everyone, all of us, will understand that, this is going to take all of us, that what we need is all hands on deck, and that all of us, from the man in the corner office to the man at the corner shop, what is going to be required is for us to make a contribution. And part of what we can do to facilitate it, I believe, through these kinds of mechanisms, is to help each other. So in the case of the average citizens, when we do our communications for behavior change and to influence how they think and approach matters, I think that is all part of trying to get them to understand their role and the contribution they can make, because there's still some amount of that is needed, that we just have to get everybody on the same page, that as you said, and I fundamentally agree with your sentiments, that we need to find a way for every one of our citizens to understand what it is that they can contribute. And it will be different in different cases, but I think that in all that we're doing, we just have to ensure that we make it very clear how people can contribute. Whether it's going to be reporting what you see, looking at the Live Good campaign in our messaging, and even, all of our engagements with the people at the different levels, community level. We just need to reinforce the point that crime is an enemy to all of us. It has caused significant, retardation of our developmental prospects, and that until we together treat with it, then it will forever be with us.
Sir?
All right, let's take the other question. You have Nikki and then Mr. McIntosh. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for an informative presentation. Ms. McIntosh, did you say that part of your finding was that there was limited technical support for the Social Intervention Committee? Just clarifying whether one of the findings is that there is limited technical support for the Social Intervention Committee.
Yes, that is right. In terms of the development of targeted, I wanted to respond, and this would link into what you are asking, that the more you minimize the exclusion of citizens in the services, it's about access to services. It's about targeted activities, services in their education, services, their accessibility to employment, their accessibility to support services. And so the more you minimize that and you include them into to have these things accessible to them, is the more that you will reduce their chances of people going into crime. So now the social intervention committees need technical support in terms of developing these targeted, to be able to see the targeted activities that will create those types of impact. And so work plans that are specific, that are smart, that are measurable, and that are alongside the resources that you are allocating, and you have time. When do you want this to start? When do you want this to end? It's really about that, and to develop these types of work. They need that type of support.
So the design of the committee was to place permanent secretaries, that very high level decision makers on the committee, and the reason, the rationale for that was to enable decision making to be taken at a level, and selected, given the remit of the law, selected ministries, the permanent secretaries of selected ministries were designated. And I'm just wondering, what does it say? Because government is, speaking of the role of the state and the support that is provided, departments and agencies are all assigned under ministries. Subject areas are all assigned. So to the extent that a design was intended to enable the deployment of resource, because a permanent secretary is a chief accounting officer, and to do an assessment at a high level to therefore enable. I'm just wondering what it has said about how that aspect has worked. And I know we're in review, but you know, it's not.
Well, it is not as
picture,
effective as we had placed. I must say, my interactions, having sat as permanent secretary, my interaction is directly with the permanent secretary, and they respond in that way. And I'm asking for a work program that is specific, that is smart, and I get it. Now, that's different from, you know, sick. And that's the reality.
I appreciate the suggestions, and I think, you know, as listening to Member Paul Wells, just saying that, you know, we're here for review, and it's a learning curve. So naturally, you know, there are lessons to be learned. But again, when office holders with roles and functions at a certain level are placed in position to ensure if those functions are not discharged, then naturally things are going to fall away. And in one of the earlier presentations, I think when the JSIP was here, is that when designs, and no design will be perfect. Sorry?
Remember, I could get it when they speak about the mask. That'll be clear. Right. Yeah.
So sorry, yes. Okay. Right, I'm just thinking that one of the comments that was made earlier was that instead of this work being treated as part of the core work of those office holders, it became sidelined, you know, and so to the extent that that was an accurate observation, then what you have seen is just underscoring that point. And
so the coordination is really the big thing here. There has to be a central point of, you know, pulling everybody together, because the issues on the ground are multi, and so there has to be one way of seeing all the pathways, and one permanent secretary. You know, there are about 4 or 5 or 6 permanent secretaries that we're dealing with, but one place has to be able to see all of that.
Here you are just trying to interrogate the issue, because the complaint about the lack of coordination is a big one across government. And somehow, even when you design, I don't know, with the JSIF as the implementing agency, the committee is chaired by the Prime Minister. It doesn't matter who he nominates, to the extent that you can't work under that, because you won't get a committee being chaired in law in government higher than your head of government. And if your head of government designates a nominee, then it still has to be seen and treated at that very high level. So something has to be, what it is showing up, perhaps, are the deficiencies in the approach that is taken within government itself. It's a problem. It's a huge problem.
I mean, the legislature,
it's a huge problem.
Trying to get a clearer picture of the concern that because we'd like to use legislation to correct some of the problems. Member AG was trying to get a clearer picture of the concern. That's why I said I was trying to get you to take out the mask. The issue raised, because we have to look at what we can use the legislation to correct. So I wasn't quite clear what your...
Since, Chairman, the recommendation would be around the work of social intervention and a re-engineering of it, as it were. I thought the presentation was good and insightful, but as we are reviewing, it really, it's a gap between the what was designed and what was intended and what could have been achieved and what in fact has been achieved. I mean, those are... You know,
yeah, I hear. This was supposed to be a new approach to correct those problems. So the Social Intervention Committee now comes at the bottom of the Business Council, which have all the places to take decisions. and it's whether or not we introduce these in the legislation to ensure. And I say a recommendation that Section 24 should, in fact, lay out the basic evidence, which we never did before, of, what are the demographic, socio-demographic data we're working with, and monitor it over a period of time as we change those parameters to implement change in the community. So that is how we introduce that in the legislation now, because it is a challenge to get coordination. Every ministry is a big silo, and we have to break all of those.
But what puzzles me, Chairman, is and again, we're learning. So, however my tone may be, it's not casting judgment. It's really seeking to understand, because it was designed with coordination. And we have good designs in government, but very often they're not implemented well, just poorly implemented. And I tell you, my own experience with this along the way, because we have another forum where we deal with these matters, the issues have been raised, and it really begins to make me wonder about the structure of government and the understanding of persons who work in government in terms of executing duties and functions is really making me wonder, as it does about us as parliamentarians too, because, just in this role, you constantly have to come and question the approach you take and whether that approach is the appropriate one in finding the solutions that are required. But it really is exposing a huge problem in government, which we see in the elusiveness of the solutions that we're seeking. Because somehow, everybody seems to think the work belongs to somebody else to do. So even when offices are tasked with specific functions, there seems to be somewhere, and the same is true of probably the Parliament too. So it's just, when things come to the surface and you're able to examine them, it's just not throwing up a good light.
If I may, Chair, just
Senator Brown.
Sorry.
Was that
Just hearing another one. Chairman, having regard for the clock, is it the intention to bring back CSJP?
Yeah.
Because I don't know, it's going to be fair for us to go through the things. I mean, the AG has had a good run-up, a little longer than Newton, though. Right? So, but I have some...
Yes, I can understand. We'll have to do that, because when 5 o'clock is a cut-off, then we're going to take one or two short questions, and then we wrap up, and we'll meet again and we'll indicate the time, and we'll do it right. All right?
I have a very short question too. A very short question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I listened to good presentation, and you touched on some things that resonated with me about the coordination, etc. But when I reflect on what has been spoken to by different groups, I've never heard anybody, JSC, TMI, nor yourselves, and nobody has referred to SDC. Nobody has referred to the SDC, and the SDC is not here. And when I look at your governance framework that you have set out, and you speak to communities and CBOs, you broke it down into residents, CBOs, CDCs. And looking at 24.1c, develop a sustainable development plan. But having heard the presentations, it seems that when you go into these communities under this particular legislation, I would have thought that there would be some CBOs existing. You found that to be a challenge, that in most communities that you go in, there is nothing in existence in relation to, and you're dealing with individuals and not groups. So for example, if I were to take Flankers, which I think has more than probably many other communities, at least we have a resource center around which the communities can, the residents in the community can find some bond. And you can get them to coordinate, they organize within the communities and so forth. But that's it. You go into some other communities, I mean, it's as if nothing exists. You just have people living there. And so I always ask, and it has bothered me since I listened to all the presentations, no one has referred to the SDC. And it seems that when JSC goes in under this program or their other programs, that they are basically starting from scratch without any existing data that comes from SDC, and it causes me to wonder whether, well, what has been your experience in the communities that you have gone into?
Well, let me start by saying, in the presentation, I didn't really refer to any particular agencies, but the coordination that I spoke to, and in my discussions with permanent secretaries, SDC, in fact, we go one-on-one with the agencies, and SDC has been one such agency. And one of the, in terms of the mapping out a much more sophisticated and standardized data collection system, the interaction has been with SDC. The recommendation to the Ministry of Finance is that in the budget, that you support building out SDC's data, because data collection capabilities, because they have been the ones who provide the community profile. So you want to be able to strengthen that community. They provide community profile for everybody, for CSJP, for JSC, everybody. But in moving towards a much more comprehensive type of standardized data collection, because it has to be the collection of data. You train the data collectors a certain way. They have a cadre, but they don't have an institutional capacity. It's always projectized. So this is the re-engineering. This is the change that we're talking about in this new approach. You emphasize first, in order to be much more prescriptive, that you're collecting proper data, real-time data, and data in all forms, shapes, and essence, and that you centralize an entity that can carry it out. And that has been the discussion that I've had with SDC, and I've gone to the permanent secretary now at that level to say, this is my discussion with SDC, and I've gone to the Ministry of Finance in mapping out the resources and in mapping out the matrix of targeted and specific type of activities. It is SDC that is at the center of this. So that is the new approach. I don't really go back in the picture. Minister Chang always says, don't look back, look through the windscreen, go forward. So this is the way we have been approaching the dialogue.
If I may add, if I could. So in addition to that, at the operational level, that level of coordination that the Secretariat is meant to be doing with all the implementing agencies, at the level of the business group, where you remove the implementation barriers, etc., SDC sits among all the other social intervention entities on the business group as well. And so not only are they involved in the coordination of activities within declared spaces with the interaction with the specific SIC for that space, as it's called now, but also to the extent that they have activities to the extent that they're engaged in activities outside of declared spaces, because SDC has a wide mandate and ambit, that work can still be coordinated by the Citizen Security Secretariat among the spaces that they're involved in. And then, of course, they are also, as I said before, involved in the work that takes place with the business group in ensuring that together all the implementation barriers are removed in order to get things done. So what I want the committee to leave with, the key takeaway, is that what we're proposing is that the CSP is a more robust and rigorous mechanism for the implementation of ZOSOs. I mean, that is the bottom line of what we're saying. It addresses some of the problems I think the member Ford would have mentioned about, things don't get done. You set up a framework in place, but it doesn't seem to work. And one of the things we certainly observed in putting the thing together is that if you want a broad approach, but the legislative provisions are such, whether for practical reasons or other reasons, it doesn't specify everybody. And here I'm referring to now the role of the permanent secretaries on the social intervention committees. There are 4 ministries that are mentioned, because obviously those are the 4 that are more likely to be involved. Some could say that they're the 4 more important ones, but some would also argue that the Ministry of Education should have been included, for argument's sake, and specifically stated. The CSP plugs that gap in a more elegant way, we believe, by requiring all ministries, departments, and agencies that have anything to do with delivering citizen security to be at the table where it matters, making sure that the right things are being done and that they are being done right. They're at that table at the very least, where they can be held to account for their contribution.
Thank you, Brigadier and Ms. Manager. I think you'll have to come back for sure. I think the time to come back is when we do the Planning Institute of Jamaica, because some of the questions will also we are brought here to see quickly what we may need to include in the legislation to ensure we, in fact, carry out the task as directed. Could have been done without legislation, but the truth, I have to agree that we have not so done, and now we are following a line which will, especially in these more severely challenged communities. There's an initial focus on the zones, but in fact, when you get the Planning Institute, to outline that the entire cooperation process involves the MDAs executing aspects of the program in all the relevant communities initially, and if the circumstances demand, then yes, you have to move in other things. So, for example, some of the targets to get the support that we are agreeing with our partners with is like 12,000 people to be certified in the age group 15 to 30 in skills. And when we look at that, we'll see it goes beyond that. Schools that has to be brought up to under the program, the Ministry Special Program, the number of schools exceeds the ZOSOs. The number of police stations to be modernized, to have the kind of more user-friendly reception is 28. So it goes beyond ZOSOs. So in the long term, we can effect the transformation. So, but again, you have made some suggestions in terms of the legislation. They'll be examined. We appreciate them, and we have the whole team here for, and we'll look at them in due course. I don't know if there'll be any more, but I think we're going to follow what we now need to do is, I think the team is interested a bit in the execution, because that has been the challenge of all of these programs. And when we fail to execute objectively, we get into the sometimes emotional, and not unnecessarily, and nothing wrong, sometimes almost political. We have the democracy of multiple parties, and nothing is wrong with that. This for this chairman. But if we lay out proper empirical data, evidence-based data, then we can follow it objectively, even if we do a little diversion into other discussions. But we know what we are following at any time, and the agency can be held accountable by anybody who is in the executive. I think in terms of, before I adjourn, the way we are scheduled, we're not having a meeting next week. We'll have a meeting the following week, at which I hope we can get this PROJ. And you will have a chance to see the entire matrix of suggestion. Take a look at them, so that we can even spend an hour of that meeting looking at the matrix to begin to give some guidance to our legal team where they're going. I suspect, I'd hope we would, but we will not finish before Parliament prorogue. What did I think is due in, as a schedule is now, we're looking at mid-February in order to go into the budget debate. But we need to carry this through. Some of the things we have done here will impact on how the budget is spent through the ministries. Start the process of execution properly. And I think we have had some good discussion, and then we look at the legislation. But we'll try and do it right. Well, we didn't do anything wrong, but we'll try and do it in a way that it achieves the outcome we want. Let me thank you all. Let me thank the team from CSP for coming, and our team from the CPC and AG, who is always with us. I wouldn't want to say, like the good book say, like the poor is always with us. Is that true, AG? That's not what you want to say in relation to your staff, but you're always with us. And I know will provide us with the kind of guidance required as we go forward. But let me thank the CSP for coming so we can get an idea to go forward with this. Your team members, we miss you next week, but have a good, enjoy the break. Thank you. Adjourn now until the 10th. Can someone move? So move.